The war does not begin when the missile leaves the rail. It begins earlier, in a place most people never see, in the silent gap between noticing and understanding, between understanding and deciding, between deciding and moving. That is the real battleground now. Not the explosion, not the impact, not the smoke. The real contest starts the instant one side realizes something important before the other side does, and then turns that realization into action before the slower force can even make sense of the danger. In the world you are about to enter, speed does not just mean fast jets or faster missiles. It means faster recognition, faster judgment, faster coordination, faster permission, faster follow-through. It means winning the race for the moment before the moment. Tonight, you are going to hear why modern war is no longer decided only by firepower, but by decision speed. You are going to see why the side that moves through confusion faster can make a stronger enemy look clumsy, blind, and late. You are going to hear how an old fighter pilot named John Boyd saw this logic before the age of AI, why military hierarchy can still choke it to death, and how modern systems now try to compress a mountain of data into a single usable decision. This is Battletech Declassified. Modern Warfare Explained. If you strip away the uniforms, the maps, the acronyms, and the polished language of strategy papers, war still comes down to a brutally simple truth. One side sees the shape of reality more clearly and more quickly than the other. That side gets to impose the pace. It gets to choose what matters, which signal is real, which target is urgent, which threat can wait, which road is still open, which ship is already trapped, which radar site is real, which one is bait. The slower side is not merely delayed. The slower side starts living in the wrong version of the world. It begins reacting to things that have already changed. It begins answering questions the battlefield is no longer asking. That is why the first shot can be misleading. By the time the first missile streaks across the sky, the deeper contest may already be over. The strike is often just the visible receipt for invisible work completed earlier. Sensors already scanned the area. Data was already fused. Intent was already inferred. Patterns were already compared. Orders were already framed. Routes were already selected. Risks were already priced in. Long before steel meets steel, a hidden decision race has already been running. The force that wins that race does not simply shoot first. It forces the other side to discover, too late, that it has been behind for minutes, hours, or even days. For centuries, armies obsessed over mass, bigger fleets, bigger guns, thicker armor, longer supply lines, larger formations. Quantity looked like power, because power was often measured in what could be seen. A line of battleships looked powerful. A column of tanks looked powerful. A city full of factories looked powerful. And sometimes that was enough. But modern conflict has changed the mathematics. A force can have plenty of weapons and still lose if it cannot interpret reality fast enough to use them correctly. It can own expensive ships and advanced aircraft and precision munitions, yet still stumble if information arrives too slowly, or arrives in the wrong order, or arrives without enough confidence to justify action. Think of a boxer who has stronger arms but slower eyes. Every punch matters less if he is always half a second behind the movement in front of him. He is not just losing exchanges. He is living in delayed information. He is throwing at where the target was. Modern war punishes that kind of lag at terrifying scale. A radar picture can age in seconds. A drone swarm can change direction before a briefing slide is even updated. A signals intelligence window can flash open and shut faster than a room full of humans can agree on what they just saw. In that world, strength still matters, but tempo decides whether strength gets used in time to matter. And tempo is no longer naturally human. That may be the strangest part of all this. The human nervous system evolved to survive predators, storms, and tribal conflict, not machine-speed battle spaces stacked with feeds from satellites, aircraft, ships, drones, cyber sensors, electronic emissions, and battlefield cameras all talking at once. Your brain is excellent at story, pattern, instinct, social meaning, and judgment under pressure. But it was not built to manually digest 10,000 simultaneous inputs while hostile systems adapt in real time. We like to imagine command as a calm room, where wise people carefully consider options, then issue elegant orders. Modern war is far uglier. It is more like trying to solve a murder mystery while the clues keep moving, the suspects keep changing clothes, and the house itself is on fire. This is why modern militaries talk so much about compression, not because they worship speed for its own sake, but because delay has become lethal. The challenge is not merely gathering more information. The challenge is reducing the distance between sensing and doing without reducing the quality of judgment so badly that speed becomes its own trap. That balancing act sits at the heart of decision advantage. Go too slowly, and the opportunity evaporates. Go too quickly without trust, and you can mistake noise for truth. So the problem is not just moving faster. It is moving faster while staying oriented. That is harder than it sounds, and it is exactly why this contest now defines the opening logic of war. There was a time when delay felt normal. Armies marched at the speed of legs and horses. Naval intelligence traveled by messenger, lamp, or radio burst. A commander could spend hours, even days, framing a decision because the battlefield itself moved more slowly. Distance created breathing room. Friction was accepted. Uncertainty was expected. Even in the industrial era, many operations still unfolded at a pace that gave human hierarchy time to think in layers. A scout saw something. A report moved upward. A senior officer studied it. Orders moved back down. Subordinates repositioned. That rhythm was imperfect, but it fit the tools of the age well enough that doctrine, culture, and institutions hardened around it. Now imagine taking that old relay system and dropping it into a battle space where a hypersonic glide vehicle closes at extraordinary speed, where a swarm of expendable drones can present dozens of moving problems at once, where a fleeting electromagnetic signature may reveal an opportunity that lasts less than a minute, and where a target can relocate before the approval chain has finished introducing itself. The old rhythm breaks. Not because people became stupid, but because the environment outran the structure built to control it. The battlefield stopped waiting for meetings. And once the battlefield stops waiting, every unnecessary handoff becomes a tax on survival. Every delay is no longer just inefficient, it becomes a gift to the enemy. That is where John Boyd enters the story. Boyd was a fighter pilot, strategist, and famously difficult thinker who saw something profound about conflict long before machine learning became a military obsession. He argued that war is not only a contest of force, it is a contest of adaptation. The side that can cycle through events faster, perceive change faster, interpret that change faster, decide faster, and act faster can make the opponent unravel from the inside. Boyd did not describe victory as a simple matter of hitting harder. He described it as a matter of getting inside the enemy's decision process so deeply that the enemy begins reacting to a world that no longer exists. His framework became famous under 4 words: observe, orient, decide, act. The OODA loop. Those words sound almost too simple, like advice from a flight instructor written on a napkin. But that simplicity is deceptive. Observation means noticing what is happening. Orientation means interpreting what that means in context. Decision means selecting a course of action. Action means doing it. Then the cycle begins again. What made Boyd different was not that he noticed decisions come before action. Everyone knows that. What made Boyd different was that he treated speed through that cycle as a weapon in itself. Move through it faster than the enemy, and you do not just act quicker. You disrupt the enemy's ability to stay mentally synchronized with reality. Picture 2 fighter pilots in a dogfight. One pilot sees a subtle shift in angle and energy, understands what it implies, decides on a maneuver, and executes before the other pilot fully grasps what is unfolding. The slower pilot is instantly behind, not only physically, but mentally. He is now reacting to consequences rather than shaping causes. He turns when he should have climbed. He climbs when he should have extended. He commits to the wrong move because the picture in his head is already old. That is the core of the OODA idea. The faster loop does not simply produce more moves. It produces confusion in the other mind. You can think of it like 2 dancers trying to lead the same song. If one dancer changes rhythm first and the other keeps guessing a beat behind, the second dancer starts stepping on the wrong part of the floor. Soon the mistake compounds. Balance goes, timing goes, confidence goes. What looked like a graceful contest becomes a scramble. That is what Boyd understood. Speed in decision-making is not only about efficiency, it is about forcing the enemy into awkward, mistimed, self-defeating behavior. The enemy begins burning energy, correcting for shocks instead of shaping the next move. Even a small tempo edge can snowball into strategic disorientation if it is maintained long enough. But Boyd's world, for all its brilliance, was still relatively compact. One pilot, one cockpit, one fight, one immediate stream of perception. Even when scaled conceptually to larger operations, the original intuition came from human combat at the edge of perception and reflex. The modern battle space is not a cockpit. It is a giant, noisy, networked organism with thousands of eyes and ears, multiple services, layered command structures, allied partners, legal review requirements, communication bottlenecks, and software systems that rarely speak perfectly to one another. The loop did not disappear. It multiplied, fragmented, and became harder to coordinate. That matters because today's problem is not simply how fast one individual can think. It is how fast an institution can transform scattered observation into coherent action without drowning itself in its own complexity. A modern force may have exquisite sensors and still fail because those sensors feed separate systems. It may have good analysts and still fail because analysts cannot push insight through the chain quickly enough. It may have smart commanders and still fail because command authority is distributed in ways that add friction at exactly the worst moment. So the modern version of Boyd's insight is more brutal. The side that best designs its institutions, networks, software, authorities, and workflows to preserve orientation under speed gains an advantage before the shooting starts. This is where many military organizations discover an uncomfortable truth. More data does not automatically create more clarity. In fact, past a certain point, more data can create paralysis. Imagine standing in a control room with screens on every wall, each showing a fragment of something urgent. A radar return here, a thermal signature there, a suspicious transmission in another channel, a drone feed from a valley, a satellite image of a road junction, a logistics alert, a cyber warning, a weather shift, a report from a human source. Each item might matter. Most cannot all matter equally, but the institution must sort them, rank them, compare them, and do it before the window closes. That is the trap of the modern information age. Abundance can feel like power right up until it becomes noise. If a commander receives too much raw material without packaging, the commander becomes a bottleneck. If every feed arrives as a separate alarm, the staff spends its time stitching fragments together instead of deciding what to do. In that situation, hierarchy slows, not because leaders are cautious by nature, but because the organization has failed to convert information into something decision-ready. The machine may have observed brilliantly, yet the institution remains stuck between observe and orient. And if you cannot orient fast enough, your weapons, no matter how advanced, are standing on the wrong side of time. Traditional military hierarchy can make this even worse. A sensor sees something. A local operator reports it. The report moves upward. Analysts review. Additional information is requested. A senior officer weighs implications. Legal or policy concerns appear. Another level wants confirmation. A commander finally approves. Operators then move to execute. That sequence can be sensible in a slow fight. In a fast fight, it can feel like watching runners pass a baton through a hallway full of locked doors. Every handoff introduces delay, interpretation risk, and the possibility that someone farther up the chain is acting on a picture already stale by the time it arrives. A moving target does not care about your briefing cycle. A fleeting radar signature does not stay politely available while committees align. A hostile launcher does not remain parked because your staffing process is elegant. This is one reason modern doctrine increasingly treats decision latency as a design flaw rather than an unavoidable inconvenience. The question becomes ruthless. Where are the seconds going? Who has the authority? Which handoff is essential? Which review step is protecting accuracy? And which one is merely inherited habit? In a world where minutes can feel prehistoric, Organizations that do not audit their own tempo start discovering that their greatest enemy is not always outside the perimeter. Sometimes it is buried inside their own process chart. To understand how militaries try to fix this, you need to understand the kill chain, not as a dramatic phrase, but as a sequence of tasks that must happen in the right order for force to be applied intelligently. One common framework is F2T2EA. Find, fix, track, target, engage, assess. These are not just technical steps, they are a story about how observation becomes consequence. First, you find something of interest. Then you fix it well enough to distinguish what it is and where it is. Then you track it over time so you do not lose it. Then you target, meaning you select an option and frame the attack problem. Then you engage. Then you assess the result. Notice what is hidden inside that simple sequence. Every step contains opportunities for delay, error, and misunderstanding. A target found too late is useless. A target fixed poorly can lead to the wrong object being followed. A target tracked inconsistently may disappear at the worst possible moment. A target selected without enough context may trigger the wrong response. An engagement launched on outdated data may hit empty space. An assessment performed too slowly may allow the enemy to recover or reposition before the next action. Decision advantage exists when that entire chain is compressed, clarified, and linked tightly enough that the system behaves less like a relay race and more like a coordinated reflex. Start with find. On paper, this sounds easy. See the thing. Detect the emitter. Notice the launch site. Spot the vehicle. But finding is no longer a matter of one scout with binoculars. It is a sprawling sensor problem involving satellites, unmanned aircraft, signals intelligence, radar, acoustic sensing, cyber data, human reporting, and sometimes commercial feeds layered into the same search. The problem is not scarcity of search tools. The problem is whether the system can notice what matters inside overwhelming clutter. In modern conflict, finding the right needle is hard enough. Finding the right needle while the enemy keeps dropping more fake needles is harder. Then comes fix. To fix a target is not merely to know that something exists. It is to pin it down with enough fidelity to make it actionable. What exactly is it? Where exactly is it? Is it mobile? Is it decoy? Is it emitting honestly or spoofing? Is it associated with higher value activity nearby? This is where the gap between raw detection and usable judgment becomes painfully obvious. A bright dot on a screen is not a solution, it is a question mark. Fixing converts the question mark into a specific problem the rest of the chain can handle. If that conversion takes too long, the advantage of finding vanishes. You cannot strike a rumor. You can only strike a verified opportunity, and verification is where time often goes to die. Track sounds straightforward until you picture what it means in real time. A target moves, weather shifts, terrain obscures, communications drop, emissions stop and start. Civilian clutter interferes. Friendly systems hand off coverage imperfectly. Suddenly tracking is not a clean line on a map. It is a constantly renewed argument between uncertainty and continuity. To track well, a force must preserve identity across change. It must know that the object seen now is the same object seen moments ago, even if its signature is weaker, its route has shifted, or its context has changed. Lose continuity, and the chain breaks. This is why modern tracking is less like following a single footprint and more like maintaining a living biography. The system asks, what has this object been doing? What does it usually do? How does its current behavior compare to known patterns? And how confident are we that this is still the same thing we care about? Done well, tracking protects tempo because later stages do not have to begin from scratch. Done badly, the chain repeatedly restarts, wasting precious time on re-identification and confirmation. Every reset gives the enemy room to slip away, hide, blend, or deceive. In a contest defined by shrinking windows, continuity is not a luxury. It is the thread that stops opportunity from unraveling. Then comes target. This is where many people assume the hard part is over. The thing has been found, fixed, tracked. Surely the strike is now inevitable. Not even close. Targeting is where the military must decide what this object means, what priority it holds, what legal authorities apply, what weapon or effect is appropriate, what collateral risks exist. Whether timing is optimal, and whether action now creates better outcomes than action later. In other words, targeting is the place where data becomes choice, and choice is where institutions reveal what kind of war they are actually prepared to fight. A good target package does not merely say, "There it is." It says, "Here is what it is likely to be. Here is why it matters. Here is how urgent it is. Here are the best options. Here are the risks. Here is the confidence level. And here is what happens if we wait." That is an enormous burden to place on human staffs in a compressed timeline. If they are building that package from scratch every time, delay explodes. But if systems can pre-assemble context, rank options, and flag inconsistencies, then commanders receive something far more valuable than raw intelligence. They receive a decision environment. And that is the bridge from information to action that modern militaries are trying desperately to shorten. Engage is the moment most movies care about, but in serious operations, it is only one link in a longer chain. Engagement might mean a missile strike, electronic attack, cyber effect, drone intercept, artillery mission, or some other action designed to impose outcome. What matters for our story is that engagement is only as good as the speed and quality of everything before it. A perfectly executed strike on a target package that arrived too late is still failure. A brilliant weapon delivered against a decoy is still waste. A fast trigger on bad orientation is not decisiveness, it is expensive confusion. Then comes assess, the least glamorous step and one of the most important. Did the action work? Was the target neutralized, damaged, displaced, or merely frightened into different behavior? Did the strike reveal new patterns? Did the enemy emit new signals? Did the action trigger retaliation elsewhere? Assessment closes the loop and feeds the next cycle. Without fast, honest assessment, the system cannot learn quickly enough to keep its tempo edge. It begins congratulating itself on assumptions rather than results. That is dangerous. In modern conflict, the side that assesses badly can keep moving at high speed in the wrong direction, which is one of the fastest ways to turn confidence into strategic self-harm. This is what decision advantage really is. Not a slogan, not a motivational phrase, not a vague belief in moving quickly. It is the deliberate design of a force so that each part of the chain supports faster, more coherent action than the opponent can manage. It is about compressing time, where compression helps, protecting judgment, where judgment matters, and removing friction, where friction no longer serves a useful purpose. It is a system-level capability, the kind that lives in software, authorities, workflows, training, infrastructure, and doctrine all at once. A useful way to think about it is this. Traditional command structures often treat speed as something generated by people working harder. Decision advantage treats speed as something created by architecture. If a staff has to manually gather feeds, clean data, reconcile timestamps, compare records, generate options, and brief a commander each time from near zero, then speed depends on heroics. Heroics do not scale well. Architecture does. When the system itself is built to package relevant information into something a human can trust and act upon, then the organization stops relying on miracles and starts relying on design. That is a quieter kind of power, but in modern war, it may be the kind that matters most. This is why modern military software platforms are often misunderstood. People hear about systems tied to intelligence fusion or AI-assisted targeting, and imagine some autonomous machine deciding who lives and dies like a villain from science fiction. That image is emotionally powerful and often intellectually lazy. The more revealing way to view many of these systems is as compression tools. Their purpose is not necessarily to replace command. Their purpose is to take sprawling, messy, time-sensitive information and turn it into something pre-organized, cross-referenced, time-stamped, and ranked for human use. In short, they try to hand the operator a nearly finished puzzle instead of a box full of scattered pieces. That distinction matters because it explains why these systems are valuable even when the human remains formally in control. A commander does not want 20 raw feeds with no synthesis. A commander wants one package that says, "This target appeared here, correlates with these emissions, matches this historical pattern, is likely associated with this activity, and will probably leave the area within this time window." That is not magic. It is organization, at speed, And organization at speed is one of the rare things that can change the outcome of a modern engagement before the first visible weapon is ever used. Take the basic logic behind platforms often discussed in this context. Systems designed to absorb data from multiple sources, reconcile it, and present a usable picture at tempo. Their promise is not simply more awareness. Their promise is fewer wasted steps between awareness and decision. If a target has already been seen by one sensor, hinted at by another, and partially contextualized by past behavior, the system tries to connect those dots faster than a human team could by hand. That does not eliminate the need for human judgment. It changes the job of the human. The human is no longer sorting every grain of sand. The human is evaluating a shaped answer. Think about how much time that can save. Instead of building the case one clue at a time, the operator receives a file that already contains location history, confidence scoring, possible identities, supporting evidence, timing, and perhaps recommended next steps. A force that can do that well is not merely collecting intelligence. It is packaging decisions. That is the deeper point. Decision advantage is often less about a faster trigger and more about a faster delivery of usable meaning. Meaning is what allows action. Without it, data is just fog with better graphics. A useful analogy is an editorial chain. Imagine breaking news in a traditional newsroom. A reporter drafts a story. An editor reviews it. A fact-checker examines details. Another editor polishes language. Legal looks at risk. Senior leadership approves publication. Finally, it goes live. That process can be excellent for accuracy, tone, and quality. But if the story changes every 2 minutes, then by the time the article is published, readers may already be living inside a different event. The newsroom did not fail because it lacked skill. It failed because its tempo no longer matched the speed of the story. Traditional strike authorization can feel similar. Information is drafted, reviewed, corrected, rechecked, approved, and finally acted on. AI-assisted targeting aims to shorten that editorial chain by presenting the most decision-ready version possible at the front end. Not a rough stack of notes, but something closer to a near-finished product. The signal arrives, and the recommended decision is already waiting nearby. That compression changes everything. It is the difference between chasing a moving train on foot and stepping onto a platform where the train is already aligned with the door. In both cases, the destination matters. In only one case do you arrive before the opportunity is gone. This is why reports of targeting cycles compressing from days or weeks to hours have drawn so much attention. Even if exact details remain partially hidden, the principle is obvious. If analysis that once required teams sifting manually through imagery, signals, historical behavior, and corroborating sources can now be accelerated dramatically, then the strategic shape of a conflict changes. The force with faster packaging of insight does not just react quicker, it starts seeing windows of opportunity that slower systems barely recognize before they shut again. That creates a compounding edge. Faster analysis produces faster action, which produces faster assessment, which produces faster learning, which then sharpens the next decision cycle. And compounding is the right word. One fast decision by itself is useful. A system that repeatedly learns and loops faster becomes oppressive. It begins to feel to the enemy as if every move is anticipated, every pause is noticed, and every pattern is becoming legible. This is what makes decision speed so dangerous as a military advantage. It is not merely about one strike. It is about reshaping the entire psychological environment of the conflict. The enemy starts sensing that every action will be detected, interpreted, and answered faster than expected. Once that fear sets in, hesitation grows. And hesitation is the doorway through which initiative walks in. Now picture a real operational problem. A hostile missile unit briefly emits, relocates, and goes quiet. The window to catch it may be painfully short. One sensor sees a clue, another sees a route. A third notices behavior consistent with previous patterns. Traditionally, stitching those fragments together might take long enough that the launcher is already gone by the time a strike package is approved. The battlefield hands you a question for 30 seconds. Your process answers it in 30 minutes. That gap is where frustration becomes failure. Decision advantage tries to close that gap by ensuring the right pieces meet earlier and in cleaner form before the human authority ever sees the problem. Instead of one analyst pulling imagery, another checking old records, another comparing signal characteristics, and a commander waiting for a coherent summary, the system assembles the packet at speed. By the time the question arrives at the human point of decision, it already contains shape, context, confidence, urgency, and options. The human still matters. But the human is no longer dragging each piece into place by hand. The human is deciding on a prepared battlefield of information. That distinction is subtle, and it may decide the outcome of future wars. This becomes even more important in a world of fleeting intelligence windows. Signals intelligence is often less like a steady conversation and more like someone cracking a door open for a breath, then slamming it shut. An emitter comes alive, reveals something useful, then disappears. A communication node lights up briefly, then changes posture. A logistics pattern exposes a route only for a moment. If your systems cannot capture, compare, and elevate that moment quickly, then the enemy gets to remain a rumor. You sensed something important, but sensing alone is not enough. Without rapid orientation, the window closes and the battlefield moves on as if it never happened. Think of it like trying to photograph lightning with a camera that takes too long to focus. You know the storm is there. You know the energy exists. But the decisive moment keeps slipping past before the device is ready. Modern kill chains try to solve that by keeping the camera focused all the time, pre-aligned, pre-linked, ready to package what matters before the flash is gone. That readiness is a competitive advantage. Not because it looks impressive on a slide, but because intelligence in modern war is often perishable, and perishable information rewards the force that can digest it before it spoils. Drone swarms make the problem more obvious because they compress the battle into a kind of mechanical panic. One drone can be tracked, identified, and addressed. A swarm forces triage. Which tracks are real threats? Which are decoys? Which are scouts? Which are jammers? Which are shaping the defender's behavior rather than trying to hit directly? Suddenly, the problem is not one object but a pattern. A human team can still work the problem, but the clock becomes cruel. Every second spent on manual sorting is a second the swarm uses to spread, adapt, and exploit openings. In that environment, the side with better decision packaging gains something more precious than mere speed. It gains composure. While the slower force feels buried under alerts, the faster force can preserve a usable picture long enough to prioritize intelligently. That does not mean perfect clarity. It means enough clarity to keep acting coherently while the enemy hopes to induce confusion. This is why decision advantage matters before the first shot. Because by the time the first interceptor is launched, the deeper contest is already happening in the defender's head or inside the software shaping what the defender sees. If that picture collapses, then the physical defense collapses shortly after. And then there is electronic warfare, the art of making reality harder to read. Jam the signal, spoof the emitter, hide the real source inside noise, manufacture ambiguity, force the enemy to waste time proving what is true. This is where decision advantage stops sounding like a technological luxury and starts sounding like oxygen. A force flooded with confusing electronic signatures must not only find the target, it must avoid falling in love with the wrong one. That requires systems that compare, question, and rank evidence faster than human teams could under pressure. Electronic attack is terrifying precisely because it attacks orientation. It does not need to destroy every sensor. It only needs to corrode trust in the picture long enough that action slows or misfires. That is the genius of fighting the loop instead of the platform. Rather than trying to blow up every missile battery, you try to bend the enemy's understanding of what deserves a missile battery's attention. Decision advantage, then, is partly about resisting that corrosion. It is about preserving a trustworthy enough picture under noise that the loop remains faster than the enemy's attempt to poison it. In the age of information warfare, orientation is a frontline asset. Lose it, and your hardware becomes beautifully engineered confusion. Here is the first big rehook. Once one side learns to compress its decision loop, the opposing side does not have to match that speed directly to stay dangerous. It can attack the conditions that make speed useful. If your system thrives on fast packaging, then I can try to poison the package. If your sensors feed a brilliant machine, then I can flood those sensors with enough false targets, enough deceptive signatures, enough electronic garbage, enough behavior that almost looks real, that the machine either slows down or starts handing your people a pile of unverifiable alarms. In other words, speed can be weaponized against itself. This is the darker side of machine-age conflict. The faster system is not invincible. It is often more vulnerable to pollution. Feed it enough ambiguity, and it must either trust too quickly or pause to verify. Both choices have cost. Trust too quickly, and it may act on fiction. Pause to verify, and it loses the tempo edge it was built to create. That tension sits at the center of modern military AI. Not because the technology is useless, but because the battlefield will always push back. Every advantage invites a counter. Every compression method invites a method of saturation, spoofing, corruption, or overload. The race is never only about speeding up. It is about staying coherent, while the enemy tries to turn your speed into panic. False targets are not just decoys on a map, they are cognitive traps. Each one consumes attention, forces a comparison, and invites hesitation. In a low-pressure environment, that may be manageable. In a real conflict, false targets are like prank calls to a fire department during an actual blaze. The goal is not simply to fool you once. The goal is to keep you busy proving what is real, while the real threat slips through. A machine can help with that problem by screening, clustering, and ranking anomalies. But if the falsehoods are numerous or cleverly shaped, then even a machine can become a very fast way of delivering uncertainty at scale. This matters because commanders do not experience uncertainty as an abstract idea. They experience it as friction in the moment of decision. A display full of possible threats is not power unless the system can say which ones deserve action now. Otherwise, the force becomes like a goalkeeper facing 20 balls launched at once, some real, some fake, some painted to look identical. The body can still move, but intelligent movement collapses under overload. Decision advantage depends on reducing that overload to something a human can meaningfully govern. If the system fails to do that, the enemy has discovered a brutal truth. You do not always need to destroy the defender. Sometimes you only need to bury the defender in competing versions of reality. That leads to saturation, one of the central ideas of modern warfare. Saturation is not just more missiles or more drones. It is more problems than the defender can process cleanly at the speed required. That distinction is critical. A defensive system might physically possess enough interceptors or enough sensors on paper, but if its decision process cannot sort, prioritize, and assign responses quickly enough, then quantity becomes irrelevant. Saturation attacks the loop, not just the magazine. It overwhelms the ability to maintain meaningful order. Think about a cashier at a grocery store with one customer. Easy. Add 3 customers. Still manageable. Add 100 customers, all waving items, asking questions, changing payment methods, and shouting contradictory prices, and the problem changes entirely. It is no longer about the cashier's knowledge of groceries. It is about the collapse of orderly sequence. Saturation in war works the same way. It does not only ask, "Can you shoot this down?" It asks, "Can you preserve coherent judgment while too many urgent things compete for the same narrow corridor of time?" The side that can preserve order under saturation keeps fighting intelligently. The side that cannot begins wasting exquisite tools on the wrong moments. And now we reach the human in the loop, the phrase repeated so often that it risks sounding comforting. In theory, keeping a human in the chain protects accountability, judgment, restraint, and context. In practice, machine speed creates pressure that changes what human control feels like. If the system surfaces a target package with high confidence and the window is closing, the human is not making a leisurely philosophical decision. The human is deciding under compression. Verify further and risk losing the opportunity, or trust the machine and risk acting on flawed synthesis. That is not no pressure. That is immense pressure squeezed into a smaller box. This is the uncomfortable truth behind automation pressure. The machine does not need to replace the human to alter human behavior. It only needs to structure the choice so aggressively that the human experiences delay as danger. Over time, that can change institutional norms. If the machine is right often enough, trust rises. If windows stay short enough, verification feels luxurious. Soon the human role can drift from deep interpreter to hurried approver. That may still count formally as human control, but it is a very different kind of control than the public often imagines. In the age of decision advantage, the most important question may not be whether a human remains in the loop. It may be what kind of human remains there, and with how much real time to disagree is less than. There is a genuine dilemma here, and trust-first analysis means admitting it. Slowing the system down can save lives if the warning is false or the classification is wrong. But slowing the system down can also cost lives if the opportunity was real and fleeting. Neither side of that equation is trivial. People who speak casually about always verifying more are often assuming a battlefield patient enough to wait. People who speak casually about always trusting machine-aided recommendations are often assuming systems far more robust and transparent than real war usually provides. The difficulty lies in the trade-off itself. A good analogy is emergency medicine. A doctor under pressure must often act before every answer is available, wait for perfect certainty, and the patient deteriorates. Act too quickly on incomplete interpretation, and the treatment itself can cause harm. The skill lies in preserving enough judgment under time stress to move without pretending uncertainty has disappeared. That is exactly the challenge of decision advantage in military systems. Compression is useful, but it does not dissolve moral weight. It simply moves that weight into tighter timelines. The faster the system, the more valuable clear human doctrine becomes, because doctrine helps people know when speed serves truth and when speed starts to outrun it. So what do we actually know? We know that the United States has embedded AI-related capabilities into elements of its kill chain for years. We know military organizations increasingly see AI not just as a novelty, but as a practical way to sort, correlate, rank, and present information under pressure. We know that operational cycles in some contexts have compressed dramatically compared with older manual methods. We know the broad institutional direction is clear. Faster decision support, faster fusion, faster targeting workflows, faster adaptation. Even when the exact architecture remains classified, the trajectory is visible. What do we not know? We do not know the full details of where human authority sits in every operational context. We do not know exactly how robust these systems remain under sophisticated spoofing, saturation, cyber attack, or strategic deception by a capable adversary. We do not know how competing powers have structured their own versions of similar capabilities behind closed doors. We do not know how often machine-aided recommendations are trusted, challenged, or delayed in the moments that matter most. That uncertainty is not a bug in our conversation. It is part of the reality. Modern conflict is increasingly shaped by classified tempo advantages, which means public understanding often arrives after the methods themselves have already changed the battlefield. 31. This uncertainty spills into law and accountability. International law was built around human agency, command responsibility, and the expectation that decisions can be traced to people who knew, intended, authorized, or neglected. But what happens when the most decisive part of a targeting recommendation is generated through machine-assisted correlation across datasets too large for any one human to reconstruct quickly? The human may still approve, yet the meaningful shape of the recommendation may have been assembled by software at a speed no legal tradition was designed to parse in real time. That does not mean law becomes irrelevant. It means law is entering a harsher climate. Accountability may become harder not because no one is present, but because causality becomes layered. Was the error in the sensor, in the training data, in the fusion logic, in the interface that framed confidence too strongly, in the commander who trusted the package, in the doctrine that rewarded tempo over caution, in the staff that failed to question a machine-generated pattern? These questions matter because future conflict will not wait for legal philosophy to catch up. The battlefield is already asking for answers about speed, autonomy, authority, and blame. And if institutions do not prepare for that now, they may discover too late that they built fast systems without equally fast moral clarity. There is another reason decision advantage will not stay a monopoly. Adversaries learn. They observe the architecture of your speed and then search for habits hidden inside it. Every system develops preferences. Which signatures it rates highly? which patterns it expects, which anomalies it treats as urgent, which regions it watches more closely, which timelines trigger action. Once those tendencies become legible, they become attack surfaces. The next major conflict may not begin with one side simply matching the other missile for missile. It may begin with one side trying to learn the other side's decision grammar before the first open exchange ever starts. That possibility changes the shape of deterrence itself. It is no longer enough to ask, how many platforms do we own? The harder question is, how predictable is the way our systems interpret the world? If enemy machines can model your patterns before your people even realize those patterns exist, then your speed becomes easier to bait, saturate, misdirect, or exhaust. In that future, strategic advantage belongs not just to the side with faster loops, but to the side whose loops are harder to read and harder to poison. Decision advantage becomes a contest not only of compression, but of adaptive unpredictability. This is where machine against machine competition becomes truly unsettling. Imagine two militaries, both using systems that learn, rank, and recommend at pace. The conflict then becomes a race between pattern engines. Which system identifies hostile behavior first? Which one infers intent from weak signals first? Which one detects deception earlier? Which one updates its model after being surprised? The opening phase of such a war might look calm to outside observers, but beneath that calm, millions of tiny machine comparisons could already be shaping who gets inside whose loop. Every war in history has involved races for land, fuel, reserves, ports, bridges, weather windows, industrial output, momentum. But the AI era adds a more ghostly race, the race for the moment before the moment. The race to know the next likely move before the opponent has fully chosen it. The race to infer pattern before pattern becomes obvious. The race to package action before the slower system can even name the problem. In that world, the first visible strike may look dramatic, but it is often only the theater curtain rising after the crucial sorting work has already happened backstage. So no, the next major conflict may not be won by the side with more missiles alone. Missiles matter. Production matters, logistics matters, mass still matters. But if one side cannot decide quickly enough where those assets should go, or how they should be timed, or which opportunities deserve scarce munitions, then sheer inventory becomes a very expensive way of proving you arrived late to the right answer. Decision speed does not replace power, it directs power. Without direction, power is just weight. The better analogy might be electricity. Owning more appliances means little if the current cannot reach them when needed. Decision advantage is part of the current of modern war. It energizes the chain. It determines whether sensors, shooters, analysts, and commanders behave like one organism or like a box of disconnected parts. A disconnected force may still possess frightening tools. But possession and orchestration are different things. The side that orchestrates faster can make a larger enemy feel like a slower animal trapped in a world that keeps shifting under its feet. This also means that decision advantage is not created by software alone. A military can buy advanced platforms and still fail if the surrounding culture is wrong. Training matters. Data quality matters. Interface design matters. Cross-service trust matters. Command authorities matter. Communication resilience matters. Even small things matter. Like whether operators understand what confidence scores really mean, whether staffs share a vocabulary for uncertainty, whether commanders know when to override machine-suggested priorities, and whether systems degrade gracefully when one feed disappears. Speed built on fragile habits is not real speed, it is a polished version of luck. That is why the strongest decision systems are usually boring at the foundation. They depend on clean data pipelines, disciplined timestamping, repeatable workflows, trusted handoffs, resilient links, and people who know exactly what each tool is for. It is tempting to imagine that victory in this area comes from one spectacular leap in AI. More often, it comes from hundreds of unglamorous improvements that stop time from leaking away. A weakly designed interface can waste seconds. A confused reporting format can waste minutes. A staff that does not trust one service's feed can waste hours. Modern war punishes those leaks brutally because the enemy's systems are not waiting while you patch them. Centralized command becomes especially vulnerable under these conditions. If every meaningful decision must climb to the top, then the top becomes a magnet for delay. That might be acceptable in a strategic pause. It becomes hazardous in a high-tempo fight. Decision advantage often requires some degree of distributed understanding and delegated authority, not because senior leaders are unimportant, but because no single human node can absorb all the relevant detail at machine speed. The institution must decide in advance which choices can be made locally, which conditions trigger automatic escalation, and which events justify pre-authorized action windows. Think about a fire spreading through a forest. If every firefighter must radio headquarters before using water, the forest wins. Headquarters still matters. It allocates resources, shapes the campaign, and protects against chaos. But tactical tempo requires the people closest to the flame to act within clear rules before the whole picture reaches the capital. Modern military systems are learning the same lesson. Speed is not only about smarter central software. It is about designing a structure where knowledge and authority meet at the right altitude. Too high, and decisions suffocate. Too low without doctrine, and coordination dissolves. The art lies in matching authority to the speed of the problem. And this brings us back to the title of the episode. Why speed wins before the first shot. Because the first shot is often a consequence, not a beginning. It is the visible expression of earlier victories in sensing, orienting, prioritizing, and authorizing. When one side enters the engagement already inside the opponent's tempo, the exchange can feel unfairly one-sided. The slower force may still look armed and dangerous, but it is operating from behind a fogged window. It sees flashes, hears alarms, and feels pressure, yet never quite catches up to the logic shaping the field. Winning before the first shot does not mean prophecy. It means being sufficiently ahead in the decision race that the enemy's options arrive already narrowed, paths close before the enemy realizes they existed. Defenses orient toward the wrong threat. Countermoves begin seconds or minutes too late. The effect is subtle until it becomes undeniable. What looks from outside like clean dominance often feels from inside like drowning in lateness. That is the essence of modern dislocation. The battle is not only fought in geography, it is fought in time. And the side that owns time begins collecting advantages before metal ever moves. Still, it would be a mistake to imagine humans fading into irrelevance. The more data the machine can process, the more valuable certain human capacities become. Judgment under ambiguity, sense of proportion, recognition of political consequence, ability to notice when the obvious answer is too obvious, ability to ask the dangerous question, what if the whole picture is being staged for us? Machines can help compress the field. Humans remain essential for deciding what kind of field they are actually standing in. That is not romantic language. It is a practical observation. Pattern recognition is powerful, but meaning at the edge of war still carries moral, strategic, and psychological layers that no dashboard fully captures. So the ideal future is not machine alone and not human alone. It is a disciplined partnership where the machine handles scale, speed, and correlation, while the human guards context, doctrine, restraint, and adaptation when the pattern breaks. The trouble is that such a balance is hard to institutionalize under real pressure. Every organization under threat drifts toward shortcuts. Every clock rewards trust in whatever looks decisive. That is why doctrine, training, and design matter so much. Not to slow everything down blindly, but to keep speed from eroding the very judgment that gives speed strategic value in the first place. Now imagine the opening hours of a future conflict between advanced powers. Not the dramatic footage that floods the internet later, but the invisible opening beneath it. Satellite feeds retask. Unusual emissions cluster. Logistics movements look wrong. Commercial data hints at military preparation. Cyber anomalies spike. Drones begin searching quietly. Models compare old baselines to new signatures. Analysts watch confidence levels rise. Somewhere, software starts connecting events that seem unrelated in isolation. Somewhere else, an adversary is trying to do the same. Before the public sees anything that looks like war, two hidden systems may already be sprinting to decide what reality means first. That is the contest of our age. Not simply who can shoot farther or carry more explosives, but who can turn fragments into action before the fragments expire, who can resist deception longer, who can preserve trust in the picture under saturation. Who can keep the human role meaningful under compression? Who can stay one cycle ahead without becoming blindly dependent on the cycle itself? The next war may still be remembered through ships sunk, aircraft lost, and cities struck. But the deeper story will likely begin earlier, in code, in sensors, in workflows, in authorities, in milliseconds of saved time that accumulate into strategic surprise. So when you hear the phrase decision advantage, do not picture a buzzword on a defense conference screen. Picture a force trying to outrun confusion before confusion hardens into defeat. Picture a commander who does not need more noise, only better packaged truth. Picture analysts freed from drowning in fragments and able instead to judge the shape of a moving threat. Picture software that turns scattered clues into a decision environment. Picture an enemy trying not merely to match that speed, but to poison it. And then picture the uncomfortable conclusion that the decisive struggle of modern war may happen in a time layer most civilians never notice. The layer before the strike, before the launch, before the alarm is even fully understood. Every age has its hidden battlefield. For cavalry, it was maneuver. For industry, it was production. For the nuclear era, it was deterrence and warning. For the age now taking shape, it is decision tempo under machine pressure. The side that wins that race does not merely fight better once battle starts. It often enters battle having already bent the terms under which battle will unfold. It wins not because war becomes simple, but because it learns the enemy's rhythms before the enemy can learn its own. And that is why speed wins before the first shot. Not because violence has become secondary, but because in modern conflict, the most important victory is often the one that makes the visible fight feel inevitable when it finally begins.